Just a Job is the podcast for the modern woman to redefine what success looks like. We highlight real women and their real stories.
Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. Ellen, we need to hand signals. Anyways, it's Monday. It is a 4-day week and we're mentally recovering. It's taking a while, honestly. Ellen, pulse check. How are we feeling?
Okay, a little temperature. I think I'm at a solid yellow right now, but we're headed, into a fabulous week. So maybe we're taking up towards green, but yeah, I'm at a yellow, I think.
We're at a yellow. Do you want to talk about it or you have other things you want to talk about?
There's a lot to unpack there, Sarah.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's just say I had an unfortunate interview experience and it didn't go how I wanted and it was totally out of my control and I got kind of screwed over, one might say. And so that's the reason for my yellow. But the reason that I'm not quite red is because I had a fabulous Labor Day weekend. My in-laws are coming into town. We've got all sorts of fun things that we're going to be doing. And when everyone is listening to this on Monday, I will no longer have blonde hair. That's right. I'm
Ellen,
getting my hair done.
You're going to be a whole different person.
I am so excited. It's the new renaissance of natural hair Ellen. So I'm very excited. I have a whole bunch of fun things to look forward to. So
yeah,
I hope
hit the refresh button.
Seriously.
She's coming back.
Here, look out, here I come. So that's my like balance between the colors, right? And in the middle. Okay. So we're hanging in there. We're doing great. What's your pulse check, temp check, Sarah?
Temp check. I would say I'm at like a moderate Sprite level. Work is a little stressful, but it is for a chunk of time and it will be over soon. So looking to the opposite side of it. Life is good right now. I am a bachelorette for the weekend. Sweet honey Michael is in Colorado. So I have this whole to-do list of things that I'm like just gonna do by myself. And like, I don't know, there's something about that, right? But I will probably be bored by like 4 p.m. tomorrow. And yeah, I'll like probably be calling people, be like, can I have some socialization? But no, doing great otherwise. This is actually, I had a conversation with a very good friend of mine. Her name is Jackie, and she is like a little sister to me. She just graduated from Creighton in May and just started her first full-time corporate job, moving to Chicago. And I had a really good conversation with her yesterday, just as far as like transitions and life and everything. And she is wise beyond her years. Truly, she is like just so, honestly, when I talk to her and I'm like, I kind of like bitch and complain, and then she's just like really positive. I'm like, what's it like? No, like, she's great.
I could adopt that mindset.
Exactly. And we talked about maybe having her on the podcast, not necessarily to interview about her career journey, but just to have her on like, hey, speaking to somebody that's 22 and navigating this really difficult period of life, what's your perspective? What can you share? What have you learned in the first few months? So I felt really good after that conversation. She's like a little sister.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Go Jackie. So, you got it, sister.
Yes, love Jackie. But we are super excited. We're heading into Aleenah's episode. And as you can tell by our outfits, we recorded this same day. I'm just now realizing this is probably the first time that's ever happened. So yay, go us. But she provided such a fresh perspective on her experience of navigating passions and full-time jobs and honestly just life. I feel like we could have talked to her for forever. And she is also somebody that is very wise beyond her years. So we're excited to jump into her episode. Ellen, any parting thoughts?
Have a fabulous week, everybody. Again, send us any suggestions for people that you'd like us to interview. I've gotten a couple, which I forgot to tell you about, Sarah. I'll have to share. But we love the recommendations. Keep them coming.
Absolutely. Well, everybody enjoy your Monday and we'll see you over in the episode.
Hey, everybody. We're going to jump into an episode with Aleenah Ansari, which she's another person that reached out to us and pitched herself, which we absolutely love. We've had a couple of those now. So I love that you shouted out to us and here you are on our episode. So a little bit about Aleenah. She's a Seattle-based writer covering travel, holistic wellness, nonlinear career paths of entrepreneurs, relate there, and representation in media. As a queer Pakistani woman, She believes you can't be what you can't see, which is why she highlights the stories of women of color, people with disabilities, and LGBTQIA plus folks in her writing. Her writing has been featured in Insider, The Seattle Times, Joy Sauce, and more. She is an at 2021 AdColor Future Human Centered Design and Engineering alumna and 425 Business 30 Under 30 honoree. Amazing. You can usually find her writing. You can find her writing about her favorite hidden gems in Seattle and beyond, reading a book by a BIPOC author, and planning her next trip to New York. Love. And for her day job, she is a product marketer in tech. Welcome, Aleenah, to the podcast. We're so excited to have you here today. How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Fab. Happy Monday, everybody, even though this is a Friday that we're recording, but we'll sprinkle some Friday energy into everybody's Monday. So, like I said, Aleenah reached out to us on Instagram. It was an immediate yes, absolutely. Your background is so diverse and unique. I'm really excited to hear about your career evolution. So, starting with the usual question, our typical opener, Aleenah, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I really wanted to be a marine biologist. I was like definitely a dolphin girl. Like, you know how there's like horse girls? Like, I was a dolphin girl. I remember like I loved dolphins so much. Yeah, like I loved it so much that one of my parents like drove me to Vancouver. I lived in Seattle. Like they drove me all the way to Vancouver to see like bottlenose dolphins because that was like the closest aquarium that had them. So safe to say, like I was a big fan. I don't think I actually knew what a marine biologist did. I just knew that I liked dolphins. So I don't really know what I was planning to do with that, but I think like as far as dreams go, like I kind of keep the ethos of that. Like it's very adventurous. It's kind of like the very non-typical path, and it's something that's fun. And I feel like I've also always been somebody who loves STEM. Like I'm very proud to love STEM. I feel like I know many people in tech who are like, yeah, I would have become a doctor, like, but I'm not good at math. And I'm like, no, I am good at math, but I chose not to become a doctor because I wanted to do something else. So I've had like many evolutions, but marine biologist is the one that like I definitely said for a couple years. Like I think I bought a book that was like what marine biologists do in a day, and I definitely thought like maybe that could be me, but it was mostly because of the dolphins, not because of the work.
Amazing. I mean, we've talked about it, but we've had a handful of people that have wanted to be marine biologists. Some are from the Midwest, which like doesn't make sense because there's definitely not bottlenose dolphins anywhere near, but it makes sense like with where you're like geographically located, you're much closer to open water. I always want to say like
Right.
the like trajectory of people who actually become marine biologists compared to those that like wish they were marine biologists as children, I'm like, what's that percentage? But enough about that. At what point did you start to focus in and like zero in on what you wanted to do, and then describing like your high school and college experience, when you started to focus in on potentially what your future looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I can't even imagine going back to high school now because I feel like it was so different. I was so lucky to go to like a college prep school, like high school. So I felt like I'm so lucky to have had educators that like really believed in me before I maybe believed in myself. So I remember like even in my freshman going on sophomore year in high school, our teachers would recommend us for honors. Like, oh, do you think that your next year you should go into an honors class or not? And I had always been really focused on STEM, like the chemistry, the biology, the lab. But I was also taking an English class. And so I remember thinking like, oh, I probably like won't be recommended for honors. Like I didn't really consider myself a writer, which is crazy now because I think that's one of the main things that I am. And I remember seeing that my teacher had recommended me for English 2 honors, and it just meant so much to me that she saw me, like I've kind of seen myself as this person really focused on STEM, like highly strategic, but she saw something in me with my creativity and my voice. And I've been really lucky to continue to have then educators and now mentors who have really told me that my voice really matters. And so that kind of thing is something that I carried with me. I didn't really discover, the work of writing until I was in college. It was actually my freshman year of college when I had a friend who was like, I'm going to try everything. Like, I'm going to join every club. I'm going to double major and double minor, and I'm going to join the college newspaper. And I was like, oh, well, I'm not much of a writer, but maybe I could apply to be a photographer. So I filled out the photographer application. I didn't think much of it. And then a week later, I realized that I had applied to be a journalist, and I had really had no idea. Like, I just kind of like, I'd seen the word journalist and I'm like, this is the same thing. And I just kept it pushing. And then the editor at the time reached out to me and said, well, like, you're in, like, we're doing a 10-week course. You'll learn how to be a journalist. You'll learn how to interview people, how to write an interview driven story. And I'd have no idea what compelled me to say yes. I think I was just like, oh, it's here. Like, what else am I going to do with my time? And I think of that decision as an inflection point that changed my life forever, because I wasn't really writing. I had never considered journalism, but I found that I just had such a deep love and a deep skill for it, which I think it helps. Like, it helps to do things that are kind of in your wheelhouse, but you can still feel like you're learning. And I remember, like, for the next like 4.5 years, because I did a 5th year in college, I spent so much of my time just running around my college campus interviewing people. And where I really found my strong suit was interviewing BIPOC experts and folks on campus that often hadn't been represented or featured in our college newspaper. And these people were engineers, they were creatives, they were entrepreneurs, and oftentimes they were building programs to uplift the next generation of folks who might not have had the resources before them. And many of the times when I would get in the room with these experts, they would say, the college newspaper has never reached out to us for a story. Like, we've been here for years and nobody has really seen us. And so it means so much that you've pitched a story and that you're interviewing us and that you're holding our story with care. And so I've been chasing that feeling ever since, just this idea that I can tell stories, like, both of my own, but I can also amplify the work of others, especially for people who aren't often featured in the media. And
Yeah.
I've just done that ever since. I actually I do work full-time in tech, and I've even worked as a writer and video producer in tech, but along the way I also started my freelance writing business to keep telling those stories outside of tech
Mhm.
and amplifying those voices that I cared so much about when I was in college, but I've carried that ethos with me even 9 years
Mhm.
later.
Yeah. I love when people's career evolutions are so organic and it's like this one serendipitous moment where everything clicks. Maybe you kind of stumbled your way in and then it just leads you and brings you to this, and you're off to the races, right? And you have this wonderful
Mm-hmm.
career path kind of unfold in front of you that is exciting and enticing for you to go chase. So I love that story. I think that's really interesting. And I also think it's very unique in that you found that niche early on, and one, you were good at it, but two, you really enjoyed it. I think that's particularly unique when it comes to work. So talk to
Mm-hmm.
us a little bit about what that transition was like post college into either an internship, if you did that during school, or what your first job out of college was like, and how you navigated that transition.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. So, as someone who's in the tech industry, I think internships have always been one of the key ways to break into a company. And what I love about internships is that you get to really be focused on learning as much as you can. You get to be a sponge. And because you're kind of like learning the company, maybe you're learning the discipline, it gives you a pass to ask as many questions as humanly possible, but also
Yeah.
connect with more people than you might when you're full time. And so I was really lucky that in between my like 3rd and 4th year of college, I had actually transitioned from being a biochem and public health major to human centered design and engineering. So I was always doing the writing. Like, I never studied journalism, but I always considered myself a journalist at heart through the writing I was doing. But I
Mhm.
realized that, I kind of potentially thought like maybe I'll be a doctor, maybe I'll go to med school. And I was realizing that I didn't want to wait forever, or maybe like 5 to 10 years to have a high impact career. I had found this love of storytelling and I figured maybe I could do something with that. And I ended up doing this program at my college called Human Centered Design and Engineering, or HCDE. And I found this community of people who really wanted to make products not only intuitive, but also like human centered and accessible and inclusive. And oftentimes, the way you do that is user research, where you're listening very deeply to the experts and the people that you're designing for. And there were so many
Mhm.
parallels with the work I was doing as a journalist. This idea that you ask open ended questions, you don't make assumptions, you let people guide you to what they want instead of assuming. And so I felt like my journalism and the skills I was building as like a human centered design practitioner was preparing me for the workforce, but I didn't really know what that would mean. So I had yet another serendipitous moment. I was in my college library. I think it was around finals in December, and I randomly logged on to like this tech company's website just to see like what kind of jobs they had. And they had exactly one internship opening for a US user experience writer. It's now called content design. And I was like, oh, tech hires writers? Like that was actually, first of all, the thing I had no idea that existed. And
Yeah.
I thought there's no way that this is for me. And then I started reading the job description, and it had bullet points like, are you somebody that centers the voices of people who are often left out of the design process? Do you have deep empathy for the people that you're creating for and want to translate that into recommendations? And I was like, oh, this is me. Like, this would be me if I
Yeah.
had written a job description. And I applied. I used whatever resume was on my computer, which I wouldn't recommend now, but it worked for me at the time. And I thought, there's no way I'm ever going to hear back from this company, because I was getting rejected by so many other companies. I was being rejected from unpaid internships. Like, I was just trying to figure out, how can I keep living in Seattle, but how am I going to do that if the internship I do isn't paid? And then 3 months later, the recruiter from the company reaches out to me and they say, oh, we think that your background, especially your writing, is really interesting. Can you send us an updated resume? And so I ended up doing that and interviewing a month later. I did the 4 1 hour interviews with somebody who became my hiring manager. And then I was hired. And it was so incredible because I had no idea that you could just sort of like see something and like be picked for it, because I feel like there's so much emphasis on how competitive it is, like how likely you're not going to get something. And so to actually like see something and say, I want it, and to get it and to show up exactly as I was, like as a storyteller, as a creative, as like not the typical person in tech, and still be chosen. I also carry that with me as a reminder that there's a place for people in tech who might not fit the bill of like the typical engineer, like the person that sees himself as technical or somebody who shapes products. And so that internship was everything to me. Some advice I got from one of my professors right before that really changed the game was, she told me to meet with 3 new people every single week, no matter what, and to ask them about what they did for their job, but also like what got them out of bed in the morning, what projects they really cared about. And thankfully, my work in journalism had prepared me for questions like that. And so, because I've met so many people, I have such an incredible network of people like me who are creatives in tech or don't have a traditional background, and many of them I'm still in touch with. And I think all of that reminded me that I could like blaze my own trail in tech. There was no one way for it to look. And then, of course, like on a more tactical level, having an internship at the company gave me an in to convert full time once I did graduate. So
Mm-hmm.
while all of my peers were like going to all these job fairs and trying to find a job, I had already secured my full time position in the summer prior. So I got to go study abroad in Prague. I got to like pick my housing because I knew exactly where I would be. And it was so much peace of mind, but also like,
Yeah.
I knew I was going to work in a place where I really valued the culture and the work. And there's no way to put a price on how incredible that is.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. The idea that one day you're sitting in the library and you just happen to come across this internship application and it works out and like has led you to where you're at. It's kind of my like Roman Empire. Sometimes I think about the like what ifs all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like what if that day you decided to not go to the library? Like how would your life have unfolded? I'm curious along the
Mm.
way, you know, during your internship, but then also too, like through your senior year, because at that point you had your job secured. You were probably, like you said, in a very good place. You're off like roaming. Was there any point where you faltered and any point where you were like, maybe this isn't for me, or like maybe there's something else I want to do? Because I have to imagine at
Mm.
21, 22, you have the
Right.
security of the job, but you're also young, and that kind of like itch is there. Like, was there any moment in your senior year or like that 5th year where you were kind of like, maybe there's
Yeah.
something else?
Yeah, definitely. I think like I call them ghost tracks. It's like this idea of like, what if I had made one different decision? Like, where would I be? It's like in Mario Kart when you can like race your best time. Like, oh, these are all the places I was. Like, I think about that all the time. I'm like, what if I had never applied? What if I hadn't accepted the return offer? And so I feel like some of that is life, right? Like, there are many decisions that we could make. And I think part of life is realizing that like, or maybe just believing that you're on the best path for you. But something that I always remind myself and even my mentees is that you're always taking the next best step for your career. So very rarely does somebody enter their dream job right out of college. If you do, that's so incredible. I love that for you. But for most of us, like, we don't know what our dream job is, or like we think we want to be a marine biologist, but we don't actually know what that means. And so even if it wasn't the perfect decision, I had no way of knowing. But what I felt like I knew is it was right for me because it was setting me up to learn about a field in a full-time capacity. It was at a company that I really respected. I knew that the manager that I could work with really valued my growth. And also, I didn't have to be there forever, right? There's many people who work jobs for 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years. Like, you have no way of knowing, but as long as you're learning something from it, then that's what matters. So I take comfort in that whenever I'm in a role or I'm working with a client, it doesn't have to be forever. It just has to be teaching me something in the moment. And once I feel like I've learned everything, then I can make a decision to go elsewhere if that's right for me.
You're like, my ears are burning because we literally just talked about this on a previous episode of like, how did you know when it was time to go to another job or position or industry, whatever? And that was my exact answer, is when you're no longer learning or growing in some way, shape, or form, it's time to look elsewhere or jump ship. So I fully resonate with that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
During your time, you're now transitioned from intern to full-time hire. Was there a significant difference? Did it feel like a natural progression for you? Was there a significant shift in responsibility? And tell us a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah, it was a really hard transition, to be honest, because, first of all, I remember feeling so exhausted at the idea of working 9 to 5, like every single day. I just remember being like, how do people do this? Because I had always worked, like when I was in college, I usually had 2 to 3 jobs at a time, but it was never like 8 hours in succession. Like, I would work the morning at my writing center, and then I would go to classes, and then I would have an afternoon shift, and then I would go TA for a course, and then sometimes I'd work a night shift. But working like 8 hours in one place, usually in one building, like, that was kind of new to me. So there was definitely a transition of like, how do people have the energy for this? How do I find what works for me? But like you said, there is also that additional responsibility, because when you're an intern, you work for 3 months, maybe more, and you're usually given like a very scoped project. You know what your impact is, but then you kind of hand it off and you leave. And when you work full time, you're often thinking the long game of like, what is the impact of the strategic decisions we make this year for next year? How do we evaluate what we've done to improve it? And so what I really learned is the importance of end-to-end ownership, and this idea that, we don't just do a singular project, but we do projects and then we evaluate the success. We decide if it was worth the budget and the return on investment, or ROI. And we might make decisions differently next year because maybe we have less people, maybe we have less budget, maybe it wasn't worth the budget that we had. And so that was the hardest part, is like taking the ownership, but also like knowing that I could have ownership. Like, even the idea of running a meeting was so scary to me, because I'm like, what do you mean I'm 12 years old? Like, in my head, like, I'm not allowed to run a meeting. But I think that's part of like, being in your role, is like, oh, like, I have ownership. I was hired for a reason. I want to need to speak up in rooms because I was hired to share my perspective. And so I think that's the growth edge that most people go through, is like knowing that their perspective matters and sharing it, and then also figuring out what they can have ownership of. Because the things you have ownership of, like, that's what ultimately will get you promoted, is demonstrating that you are able to see something end to end, evaluate it, and make progress. Like, ownership is a key part of that. So I feel like I was learning all those lessons at once. And then when I was working 6 months into my role is when we transitioned fully remote, because it was 2020. And that was a new era of work where like every company overnight became a tech company, but we were also a tech company. So we already had all the tools in place because we used them and we sold them to customers. So I think what I learned in that is, how do you see challenges as an opportunity? So at the time, like, we were telling stories about how our company would use technology internally, so companies externally could like learn from those challenges and lessons learned. And I remember being like, let's write a story about the transition that every company is going through. How do you run inclusive meetings when you're fully remote? How do you set your company up for security? And we started creating the content that we felt like companies needed, because we knew that they were going through that transition. And I learned so much in that period about how to adapt. What does it mean to like have this entire vision of your role and have it shift literally overnight? And some of my like favorite stories about transformation have occurred during that time because we had no choice but to pivot and to change. And in ways, we're doing that all the time, whether we know it or not.
Making that transition from, you know, an internship where you're in office, early career, you're in office, like a lot of our listeners now work from home full time, or at least have a hybrid schedule.
Yeah.
Like on a personal level, like outside of work, what are some things that you do or did to help make that transition a little bit smoother? And especially if there's things that you still now 4 years later have integrated into your schedule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much beauty in remote and hybrid work because what it's really about is flexibility. Like, I think that's why people they just want the option to be able to like be at home. Like, I have someone coming to help with home renovations on Monday. And so to feel like I can like handle that and let them in, but I can still be on my meetings, like that gives me a lot of peace of mind. And so I think like when I think about the transition, I think the most important thing is like figuring out the ways that you work best, because when you're in an office, like you're creating this like very specific period of time and place where you're productive. It's like I remember I used to like leave my laptop at work. Like I never brought it home. And so I had this really clear separation of like, this is me working, this is me at home, and the two will never cross. And that is really, really helpful. But when you have hybrid work or remote work, everything kind of like melds into each other. And so I would say the best thing that you can do is figure out how to structure your time so it's the most productive for you, but also like the people that you work with. So many companies, for example, even if they are remote or hybrid, or there's a few people that are remote, but other people are in office, they'll create like core hours where meetings are set. And I find that to be really, really helpful. That's like, okay, if you're going to set up a meeting, do it between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. That way we can accommodate time zones. You know when you'll be heads down, but then hopefully you have time before to kind of prepare for the day, and you have time after to action on the things that you get in meetings. Because when we're in meetings all day, how are we doing the work that we're being assigned in those meetings? So I think you have to figure out like the structure that works for you when you need breaks. And I think the other thing that I learned about remote and hybrid work is that every interaction becomes a meeting. And that is actually a really high cognitive load that I can't just walk up to someone and say, hey, what do I do about this, right? Like I have to be like, okay, let me compose this message that like gives the context, and then I link to it, and do I share my screen, and do I have the right things up? So I think there's also that piece of like, how do you create opportunities for quick questions? Like, can you have an office hours where like, can your manager have an office hours where you can jump in with quick questions, or can you create space for that at the beginning or end of the day? And so all of this is to say, like, you kind of have to find the right structure where structure makes sense, but then also create opportunities for that organic connection and question asking, especially when you're early in career and you have a lot of questions. I think being transparent with your hiring manager, your manager, mentors that you may have, so that way you have those opportunities to connect, the more likely you are to get the answers you need to be productive wherever you're working.
And finding the balance of when it's time to ask questions, when you need to go find it out yourself, when to have the meeting, when to send the Slack message, all of those fun things, which I think unfortunately come with time and experience, and there's no playbook for how to do that. And to your point, like you said, you got to find what works for you and then your team as well. So I love that advice. That's awesome. I am curious about you starting your freelance writing on the side while working at the same time. Sarah and I talk a lot about balancing full-time jobs and then with podcasts as well. So I'm curious what your experience was like having the idea, getting everything started up, and what it's like managing two very important things at the same time. All of that wrapped into one. How's that for 7 questions in one?
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think about because, you know, I never planned to be a small business owner, an entrepreneur, a freelancer, a writer. Like none of these things were expected. But I think the way it came to be for me was also pretty organic. So I remember actually like 10 months into my first role. So imagine like I'm working full time. Now I've transitioned to fully remote work. I'm like, who am I? I don't even have an office. Like I'm buying furniture for my home that I was never in because I was always working. And there was a day where 2/3 of my team was laid off. So I got on a call and like a few of my team members were on it. And they said, everybody who's not in this call was laid off 30 minutes ago. And so then I'm like doing this mental math of like, who's here, who's not here, what's going on. And of course I'm fully remote. So I'm sitting at my dining table crying. Like I can't even say goodbye to these people in person. Like I know layoffs happen, but at the same time I had what I later learned was survivor's guilt, which was the fact that I wasn't laid off, even though I was the least senior person on the team. And of course, I appreciated that. Like it was a way the company was investing in me. But at the same time, it's a frightening place to be because all these people you work with, many of them had been at the company 10, 15, 20 years, were laid off. And there I was being given this chance. And was it a chance? I didn't know. And so when I think about that moment, it actually really was the catalyst for me to say, I never want to feel like if I lost my full-time job that I wouldn't have anything. Because I think many people are in that position, right? They get laid off, they lose their job. And a lot of times your job, it can be your life. It's like, it's your livelihood. It's the way that you provide for your family. It's what you talk about in and outside of work. And so the idea of like, if I lose this, I don't want to feel like I have nothing at the end of the day. And that was actually kind of the seed that had been planted that told me I need to build something outside of work. I just want to feel like I have something. And I think this other piece that came up for me was ownership. So I was creating these stories. I was creating like written stories and videos and content. I was doing on-camera interviews for my work. But at the end of the day, that wasn't mine. It was owned by the company. And that was, of course, like what I had signed up for. And I started to think about what would it mean to create things that weren't like, from my company, but were from Aleenah Ansari that had my name on it. And so that's why I started doing, I did a lot of like career consulting. So like coaching people on navigating the job search. And then out of that, I started doing more freelance writing. And I think the big shift for me was actually charging for my work because I had never done it up until that point. And so I had been coaching people for free. I'd been writing for free. And I thought, well, that's fair. I work a full-time job. But I specifically was like, I think I need to get paid for this. Like, it's important for me to know how to prioritize it. I want to feel like I'm building something. And I went to all my clients and I said, thank you so much for working with me. I'm transitioning to making this a paid offering. I totally respect whatever decision you make to continue working with me or not. And most of them were really, really excited. I remember one person who said, you should have been charging a long time ago. And I was like, oh, okay. So we're all aware of the high value impact and like, you get what you pay for. So that was really important. It was pivotal, but it was also really scary. Like nobody had taught me how to run a business. Like I didn't know how to start an LLC. I didn't know like where to get a business card. Like I had no idea what I was doing. And so thankfully I applied again this like journalistic lens where I just started meeting with people who were small business owners or who were doing things I admired. And I would ask them like, well, how did you start? Like, how did you decide what was worth it in terms of expenses? Where did you find your first clients? What do you wish you had known from the beginning? And that kind of led me to starting my business. A lot of people will ask me like the sort of, how do you do it? Like, how do you balance running a business and working full time? And I think, there is no like kryptonite for answering that question. I think if there was, we would all have it. But I think for me, like when I think about my business, I really consider it the work of my life. Like, I think it was something I was meant to do. I was meant to discover journalism that fateful day in my freshman year of college. And I was meant to be doing it now. And because I love it so much and it's just like, it's exactly what I want to be doing. It's the stories that matter. That is kind of like the why that has kept me going. So of course I have days where I'm like, why am I working 5 to midnight? Lately I've had to work weekends to finish stories. Like, why do I spend so much time doing this? And I really do it because I love it, right? Like I'm a one-person business. Nobody's asking me to do this. No manager's like, when is this coming? But because I'm so intrinsically motivated to do what I love, like that's why I choose it. And I think like the next stage for me as a small business owner is like, what does balance look like? Like, how can I do more with less? How can I like potentially raise my rate so I'm still making the same income, but maybe I'm doing a few targeted projects? Like that evolution will come, but I think the thing that like can't be bought, can't be taught is just like this intrinsic like I'm doing this because I know it matters and like I'll find a way to make it work. And if it no longer makes sense to me, then I'll make that decision. But while it makes sense, while I feel like I can, I'll do it. And when I need help, I'll ask for it. And that has carried me a really long way.
It's
Wow.
so inspiring. I just
Mhm.
got like a new like appreciation for one, the podcast and doing this outside of work and the motivation behind it. So thank you for that.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say too, like just a kudos to you because as a one person show, you don't have. I mean, you might get feedback from the people that are paying you, but there is some like relationship to it of like this is an exchange for money. It's not like I'm doing this because I
Mm.
want the pat on the back. But as a one person entrepreneur, it's kind of just like one day you just need somebody to give you the kudos that you deserve. So let this be that day.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, congratulations on running a successful business. First off, like starting it, getting
Thank
it
you.
off the ground, and continuing to pursue it and grow it and explore like how this will continue to fit in with your life. It is very interesting, like looking at the mindset of entrepreneurs, especially the mindset of
Yeah.
entrepreneurs that have a full-time career and also manage their business on the side. I feel like they're just like the most superhuman people around.
Mm.
What I'm curious about, like experiences where you've run into any sort of instances of like burnout or moments where you're like, is this it? Am I throwing in the towel? Like, how did you work through
Mm.
those?
Yeah. I mean, I think I always have moments like this. I remember I read a stat that the average small business ends after 5 years, and I'm in my
I
fourth
thought,
year. And
yeah.
like, yeah, 5 years is, it's not, I mean, it's like the longest, shortest time. Like, it's not that long, but
Hmm.
it sort of makes sense. And so, yeah, like, even though I love what I do, like, frequently I'm like, I think about how much time I put into my business, because I think what people forget is like, of course, like when you run your business, you're doing the thing you love, but outside of that, you're building a business, and building a business is its own task that takes time. It's like, am I keeping up with my quarterly taxes? Like, am I bookkeeping? Am I chasing people on the invoices I haven't gotten? Like, my writing coach always says your business is 6 weeks ahead of you. Like, am I like generating leads so that way I have work in 6 weeks when I finish what I'm working on? And I feel like that's what people forget is like, yes, you do what you love, so great, so lovely, but like, how do you build a sustainable business around it? And especially when you're early, you might not have the funds to hire someone to do that, or it might not make sense because it cuts into your revenue. So how do you do that yourself? And so I definitely have those moments. I love what I do. I love running a business, but it is a lot of work and mind share. But I'm also really lucky that I feel like every time I'm like questioning, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Like, why am I writing this story? Like, no one's going to read it. Does it even matter? Because I think sometimes as a writer, you kind of are like shouting into the void. Like, I'll be like, I think this story is important. I can't be the only one with this question, but how do I really know someone's asking that unless someone's told me that they want it? And pretty much every time, somebody randomly will like, they'll message me on Instagram or they'll text me. Like, this happened last night. I was like getting ready for bed, and I had written this story about how my partner and I are approaching our finances like as a queer couple, and how we're redefining fairness. And that, you know, fairness, like especially for us, is not along gendered lines because we're both women, but also like fairness is, does it feel fair to you? Like, does it feel equitable? And it's not just like assets versus tasks, but like, who's taking like the emotional and mental load of like planning trips or figuring out maintenance, or like, you know, like there are all these things wrapped up in it. And I talked about like how we approach it in this like very open way, and in a way where like, no, it's not 50-50, but 50-50 isn't what defines fairness for us. And so I
Mm.
thought, you know, no one's really asked me about this, but like, I think it's important. Like, I'll just write it. And then my friend messaged me that she like really appreciated the perspective of this idea that like, oftentimes we only see fairness represented by like straight couples or in heteronormative ways, and that like we can all learn from defining fairness in a different way. Like, that's something that we can decide. And I was like, oh, you read this, like, and it meant something to you. Like, I'm lucky that I have a community where people are often messaging me that my work means something to them. And I feel like that's what I often remind other people, is that if you love someone's work, it goes so far to tell them that, because first of all, they may not know it, but they also may be having a moment where they're like, yeah, does this mean anything? Like, even when I think about living in Seattle, and there's so many small businesses that are closing, like for various reasons. Like, I think margins are really thin, rent is really expensive. And it's like, what if we were able to like support these businesses year round? Like, what if that infrastructure was built in from the very beginning? So we're not just missing things when they're gone, but we're appreciating them while they're here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, like, even as a small business owner, if I can't offer something, like, I will refer my friends or like my community small businesses. Like, I'll amplify the work of other people and their products, because I know like there's room for all of us to win. And I think all of that does keep me going, because it reminds me that when my work matters, but it also reminds me that like I'm not the only one doing this. Like, when I have a challenge, I'm not the first one to face it, and I won't be the last. And I have a community of people I can tap into for like resources and support. And that has
Mm-hmm.
actually been the harder lesson to learn, is like learning to be honest with other small business owners and people in your community to say, I'm really struggling with this. What have you tried? Like, even when I talk to my friends, I'm like, you need to raise your rates, like not just now, but like you need to be doing this on a regular cadence. And they're like, can I do that? And I'm like, yes. And I might be the only one to tell you this, but I will. And like, let's talk about like what kind of email you can write to your clients, or if someone's working a full-time job, let's talk about how you can negotiate that initial offer and see what's on the table. And if it's not money, like, is it flexibility? Is it getting like a stipend to support your education? There's all these things that we can ask about and we can ask for, but we sort of need somebody to be there for us. So that has given me a lot of comfort, is like knowing when to ask for help, but also having people who will tell me that my work matters, just as like
Mm-hmm.
this emotional thing of like moving forward, because I know that somebody out there is benefiting from it in some way.
Yeah. I love the why. I also, I think that's a fabulous takeaway from this as well. Like, go support a local business. Go tell someone that you enjoyed their work, that it resonated with you, that it's important to them. Because even to your point, like, just that one little message like means so much. Like, someone
Yeah.
told me they listened to a podcast episode. Oh my God, I like want to hug them. It makes me so happy.
Mm,
So that's a good
mhm.
takeaway. Everyone go support a local business. Go tell someone that their work matters. I think that's really important. Aleenah, I know that mentorship is something that's really important to you, both you having your own mentees and then looking up to mentors that you have. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important to you and how you balance kind of the people looking up to you and then you looking up to other people as well?
Yeah. You know, when I think about the legacy of my work, like it of course is like my writing and my stories, but I think even more importantly, it's through the people that I'm able to mentor, because I know that I wouldn't be here without like the mentorship, the advice, and the support I've received over the years. I even think about my first internship when I was in tech, and I was sort of like unsure about if tech was right for me. Like, I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me. And I went to some internal event with a leader, and I had written this like recap in my notebook. And so I had my one-on-one with my mentor, and I just like I felt like I trusted her enough to share it. So I was like, oh, I wrote this for myself so I don't forget what happens. And she was like, oh, I think you should publish this. Like, why don't you publish it on LinkedIn? Or like, you're always writing things in your notebooks. I would always carry around this notebook. Why don't you turn those into Medium or LinkedIn articles, and then we can share them? And actually that summer, I think I self-published 7 or 8 articles like on Medium and LinkedIn. And she was such a great mentor that she not only saw that, but she actually amplified it. So every 2 weeks, she would reach out to everyone in our org, as well as leadership, to say, Aleenah on my team is our intern, and she wrote these stories, would love for you to read them and take a look, because her perspective is so important. And her telling me that my story mattered, I felt like is something I've carried with me in so many ways, because I did need to hear that. Like, I don't know if I knew that internally, and having somebody say that to me, like, especially when I like trusted them with my vulnerability, and for them to take that and say, yes, and I think you should share it, that meant so much. And I think it's part of the reason that I did start my business, because before I was often interviewing other people and amplifying their perspective. And it was really this point when I started writing about myself, something that I actually wasn't as comfortable with, or if I wasn't sharing it. And one of the most important stories I wrote that summer was simply about being a person of color in tech and imposter syndrome. This idea that like I felt like I didn't belong, and that maybe like there was something wrong with me because I didn't look like everybody else. And many people I knew, like, they had literally told me they grew up trick-or-treating at this company because their parents worked there, or that they were going to carpool. And none of my family worked in tech. Like, the first time I ever visited the campus, like, I got off the bus and I ran in circles, like, trying to find the recruiting building. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. And so people like championing me is why mentorship matters so much to me now as somebody who can give back, because I think about like the 3 one-on-ones I had a week as an intern, the conversations I had about shifting to remote work and hybrid work. And I asked my own mentors, how do I maintain visibility if my leaders can't see me? What does that mean? I can't run into them in the elevator and say, hi, my name is Aleenah. What can I do? And so now pretty much anytime somebody reaches out to me, like I'll pretty much always say yes, because I think about all the conversations that have shaped me, that I think the least that I can do is try to help others. And hopefully say some of the things that have transformed me forever. Like if I can provide any advice, any 2 cents, any perspective, then maybe I can help them even play a small part in their journey and feel a little more confident. So I feel really lucky because many of my mentees have gone so much further than me. They've won way bigger awards than me. They've been promoted faster than me. And I love that, because that's what you want for your mentees, is to go so much further than you ever could and to take that advice and run with it. And I think that makes me more proud than anything else, is knowing that I am inviting people to recognize that their voice matters, and to say, even just, you belong here. You can go for the things that you want to. There's a place for you. Even small reminders like that really add up, especially when you're early in career. So I try to pass that on to whoever might need it.
Definitely. Lena, I have a big question for you. How do you define success for yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, success is really about lifting as I climb, like ensuring that not only am I creating things that I really care about or I feel like need to exist, but that I'm inviting other people to do the same. Like so much of my work is really centered around the importance of knowing your own story. So in many ways, I've gotten to share my story. I've gotten to amplify the work of many like BIPOC creatives and experts and entrepreneurs. But to me, the subtext of that is like, your story matters too. You can do this too. If you have the mentorship and the guidance and you ask questions, like all of this is possible for you in ways that you didn't know. And so anytime that somebody tells me that my work has inspired them, has invited them to think about starting their own business, has been the reason that they applied for a job that they didn't think they could get, but they were really excited about, invites them to put themselves in conversations and rooms that they haven't been in before, that to me is really what success looks like. Because at the end of the day, who knows how long my stories are going to live on the internet? Who knows how long I'm going to run a business? But if my work is the reason that people are putting themselves out there, then that is inherently success. And I think one thing that I've also really learned, that people always ask me, like, I think people always see like the successes, like you probably heard my bio at the beginning of all these things I've done. And I feel like what you don't see is that I'm just willing to try for as many things as humanly possible, because I'm not afraid to fail. Like, I think they say either you fail or you learn. To me, nothing is a failure as long as I'm learning from it. And so a lot of my work is like, what happens when you put yourself out there? And if you don't get it, how can you get feedback, or how can you get mentorship? So that way, the next time you go out for it, you feel stronger. Maybe you run a business and it doesn't work, but then you learn what you like and you try something else. And so as long as I'm inviting that kind of invitation to try and learn, then I feel like I've been successful in the work and the legacy that I have.
I really like that phrase that you use, lifting as you climb. I've never heard that before, and that was just like a beautiful picture you just painted in my mind as well. So I love that definition. Thank you. We're going to jump into some rapid fire questions. So I'm going to start. Aleenah, what is one thing you cannot... Oh my gosh, Sarah, now I'm turning into you screwing up this question.
Sorry.
What is one thing you cannot live without during the workday?
Oh, probably my water bottle, because I do not drink enough water. And sometimes, like, I am sat in this chair for several hours, so I just learned, put the water in it, have it. And my, like, backup answer is some kind of, like, moisturizing chapstick. I feel like never underestimate the power of a chapstick.
I like that. I like
It is impossible to show up to work if you're dehydrated and have chapped lips. Truly, it's so distracting.
Yes.
Next question for you. What's your favorite way to unwind after work? Even if it is at midnight.
Yeah, for me, I think it's really been reading. I actually do interview quite a few authors, so I had this problem of like monetizing all my hobbies, but anytime I get to just read a book, like I don't have to like have my pen, I don't have to write any questions, like I just get to read the book and like decide how I feel. That to me feels like truly unwinding.
Ooh, that sounds lovely. Especially after a long day, like just curling up and reading a book. Fabulous. I want
Mm-hmm.
to know what your least favorite corporate catchphrase is.
Oh my god. There's so many.
I know.
I feel like corporate speak has been like co-opted in real life, you know? It's like psychology, like therapy terms being used in
Yes.
everyday life. I feel like I think the ones that come to mind is like the circle back, put a pin in this. I'm like, can we just discuss it? Like, I know we're gonna circle back, but like, just give me like your initial reaction. Like, just give me something to go off of. I really appreciate I have like kind of like a do it now mentality where like, just give me something, you know? Just give me a
Yeah.
little bit to go off of. Even if you need to like think a little more, like, I want the initial thoughts right now.
Mhm. We should,
All right,
Sarah, we should do like a
last.
whole, oh, sorry. We should do a whole episode on like corporate catchphrases and our initial reactions to them. That would be fun.
Yeah, there's unfortunately too many. It is.
Mm-hmm.
It is actually disgusting. All right, last question for you. In office, hybrid. That feels like a giveaway. Or work from home.
You know, I've been really appreciating the hybrid model. Like I said, I love the flexibility of remote work, but I think what hybrid has taught me is that I actually do like going into the office, but I think what companies need to learn is there needs to be a strong reason to go into the office. So for me, I go in
Mhm.
because like I went in yesterday and I saw a bunch of people at the free coffee cart, and then I got lunch with my friend, and like I'm supporting an event where an author's coming to campus and I'm like doing the intro and the outro and I get to meet someone I've always admired. So I think hybrid, but let's not make people come in for nothing. Let's give them a reason to feel excited so it doesn't feel like a chore, but like truly a place for like community and learning.
Give us some perks, give us some incentives, and then we won't complain as much, right? At least that's how I
Yes.
feel.
Exactly.
Yes. Aleenah, thank you so much for spending your time with us. It was so
Yes, thank you.
fascinating to listen to you and your why and your career evolution. We'll make sure to include all of the places that you can find Aleenah. Again, thank you so much. We really, really enjoyed having you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Amazing. Thanks, everybody. Have a fabulous Monday. And remember, it's literally just a job.